This week on Crossroads Politics,
women deserve the chance to win in their own sports.
The debate over transgender student athletes hits the Indiana State House.
Transgender youth are in crisis.
Passionate debate over what it means to play fair. And a massive shift in the plan to deal with your property taxes. Lawmakers ditch most of the governor's plan as they try to balance savings for homeowners against paying for city services. Plus,
pressure for these folks to move inside and off the street.
The worst possible response to their circumstances is to arrest them.
Criminalizing homelessness? We're looking at a bill that would make sleeping on public property a crime. And lawmakers author bills, but lobbying can make or break a policy behind the scenes. We look into its influence at the Indiana State House. But first,
I don't look at this bill as cutting services. I look at this bill as preserving services for those most vulnerable.
Lawmakers debate a cap on Medicaid. It could save the state millions, but cost 200,000 Hoosiers their health insurance. Welcome to this week's Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus. I'm Dustin Grove. A lot to get to, as you just saw, a lot of movement on some very big issues. So let's head to the State House and Emily Longnecker. Hopefully you were wearing your running shoes for all these hearings this week. Emily, let's start with managing Medicaid dollars. Nearly 1.8 million Hoosiers are enrolled in some form of Medicaid. Lawmakers are debating a bill that could put some painful limits on part of this program, huh?
Yeah, you know, Dustin, the two biggest items that the state spends money on at this point are education and Medicaid. But Republican lawmakers have said that the recent growth of Medicaid, it can't keep going at the rate it has, that it is unsustainable. And they have a Senate Bill 2, that they believe will curb some of that growth. But critics of this bill say it could take away care for some of the state's most vulnerable people. Take a look.
Wonderful. We see miracles every day.
Now, Dana Simons has come to the Indiana State House looking for another miracle in the halls here, where some of the state's most powerful people call the shots. Her focus today is on Senate Bill 2. Simons runs a treatment and recovery program in Terre Haute for people struggling with substance abuse disorders.
We have areas around us, small farming communities, they're just decimated by drugs.
By the time they get to the program Simons runs, it's already been a long road, oftentimes marked by time in prison and relapses.
We have people that were taught to cook meth when they were 9.
Despite that, Simons says many thrive in recovery. The services they receive are covered by Medicaid's Healthy Indiana plan. Now Simons worries the provisions in Senate Bill 2, particularly capping the Healthy Indiana plan, so only 500,000 Hoosiers can be on it, will mean some of her clients won't get the help they need.
That's the one question. What do you mean this cap? Who are the ones you're leaving out? It doesn't say anything about who doesn't then qualify.
Under the bill, those on HIP would be required to prove they're fulfilling a 20-hour-a-week work requirement. There's an exception for those in recovery programs. But what about when they get out?
Requiring them to do the paperwork, to prove that they're volunteering or prove that they're working, or it's just another hurdle that they don't need in their lives.
Republican lawmakers have said the recent growth in Medicaid spending is unsustainable, and changes are necessary to preserve the program's longevity for the state's most vulnerable. When it comes to Simons' clients,
they are the most vulnerable.
She agrees the state needs to do a better job managing Medicaid's expansion and now proposed retraction.
I get it. She's
just praying her clients won't be the ones on the receiving end of the cuts.
The joy that they have in life, and that's all at risk of going away. And it just makes me so sad.
Now, Senate Bill 2 passed out of committee along party lines. Democratic State Senator Fadi Kadora says that he plans to offer some amendments when the bill goes before the full Senate, and some of those amendments address some of the concerns that you heard Ms. Simons say in that story.
Some of the people against this proposal say it would put the health of the most vulnerable Hoosiers at risk, those often on the Healthy Indiana plan. So how do the bill's supporters respond to that argument?
So, Dustin, they say that this bill is going to protect Medicaid for the future and the most vulnerable. Republicans expected there to be many fewer Hoosiers still on Medicaid at this point. When it was first passed in 2008, there were only 40,000 Hoosiers on the Healthy Indiana plan. Today, that number is 700,000. Republicans say it's just unsustainable.
I don't look at this bill as cutting services. I look at this bill as preserving services for those most vulnerable and making sure that we are able to continue funding those services. And so that is the point of this. And if we actually do a deep dive.
The bill would cap the number of Hoosiers to 500,000 on this plan. So about 200,000 people would lose their benefits and end up on a waiting list under the current version. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. We'll check back in a few. I'm joined now by Nikki Kelly, editor of the Capitol Chronicle. So it has jumped a lot over the years in number, but talk about taking 200,000 people off the rolls. That's a pretty tall number. Do you expect that to be softened a little bit, or do you think it'll stick?
Yeah, I think it might stick. I mean, the way that lawmakers are looking at it is we have traditional Medicaid here, and that's like 1 million people.
Yep.
And, you know, those are the poorest of the poor in the state. Healthy Indiana Plan is a step up. It's not traditional Medicaid. You can make a little bit more money. The idea is it's sort of the working poor. And so that's where they want to focus. They're saying if we get this pot in line, we can still afford to serve the poorest of the poor. And so it's actually about 250,000 as of the latest monthly enrollments, people that would be off. We're now at 750 for that program.
Okay.
And so they seem surprised that so many people are on it, but you know, that just means Hoosiers are not making the incomes that they think they're making because it's all set by an eligibility on your income level.
What about work requirements? We talked in that story, we heard from Emily talking about that part of the bill. Is that still in this latest version?
It is. It's either work or volunteering. And
Okay.
there are some exceptions, of course, if you're disabled or if you have young children at home, that kind of thing. But those are still in the bill. Another interesting thing that they are doing, and this is for the whole Medicaid population, not just HIP, is quarterly eligibility checks. So basically right now, yearly, you have to go through the system and still prove that you're eligible with, you know, pay stubs and stuff like that. And now they want to do that for every single person 4 times a year. Wow. It's a huge administrative burden.
Okay. All right. We'll check back with you on another issue coming up. Speaking of other issues, let's talk about the other issue that lawmakers are dealing with right now, a big one, property tax reform. This week, they made a major change in what relief would look like for Hoosiers. The latest version leaves cities and schools with more money, but homeowners with higher bills. Let's show you what we're talking about here. This week, the Senate largely abandoned Governor Braun's proposed property tax cuts and are instead putting the focus more on limiting how much your tax bills can grow in the future. Senate Bill 1, as originally introduced, would have slashed more than $1 billion in property taxes next year. It would have massively expanded your homestead deduction every homeowner gets on their primary residence. But the holes it would have left in local budgets for cities and schools was equally massive. Marion County, for example, would have lost $146 million in the first year. Hamilton County would have lost $140 million. Now, this revised bill softens that blow to communities. So you can see the cut goes from $146 million in Marion County down to $24 million. In Hamilton County, it goes from $140 million to $18 million. This revised bill also still offers some savings to seniors and some first-time homebuyers. The change comes after a hearing last week where the mayors and other city officials and school officials told lawmakers that the original bill would be, in their words, catastrophic. We also heard devastating to local services because remember, property taxes pay for schools, roads, police, you name it. But these lawmakers are also trying to help out homeowners who say taxes have grown out of control. And Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith was disappointed in these latest changes. Take a listen.
I'd like to see some amendments that kind of put the governor's language back in the bill. We'll see if some senators can get that back in. But again, even if they don't, if the bill goes over to the House, then we'll start working the House to make sure that, you know, whatever happens is the best possible outcome for everyday Hoosiers.
So the bill will now move on to the full Senate for consideration. Nikki, do you know, was this a direct response, you think, from the outcry from community municipal leaders, or do you think that that original version was doomed from the start?
I mean, I do think it was a response. Obviously, local governments came and said, you know, these are drastic cuts. I think under Braun's plan, it was going to be $1.1 billion cut in the first year. And so I think this new plan is about a third of that. They did add some savings for farmers that was not in Braun's plan, so that's helpful to them. They've also dealt with skyrocketing property tax bills. But yeah, I mean, they're trying to find a balance toward helping homeowners, but also recognizing that money provides services that homeowners need.
This doesn't look much like Governor Braun, like what he pitched to voters or lawmakers. Do you expect some pushback in the House when it moves over to the House?
I'm not sure about that. The fact is the Senate seemed far more, I guess, open to the property tax discussion than the House. I mean, I'm certain we'll see some smaller changes in there, but I don't think that they will probably revert back to Braun's sort of large scale cut.
Well, if you remember, even before Governor Braun was elected, the leader of the Senate, the leader of the House, both indicated to reporters, we may touch property taxes a little bit, but it doesn't seem like they wanted to be very involved in it at all.
No, I mean, they're going to look for changing some stuff kind of around the edges, you know. We can't do a massive overhaul of property taxes this year. That's what they've said.
Yeah.
And so there were some amendments yesterday that a Republican tried to put in to improve it, and the Republican caucus generally held the line on all those.
Okay, boy, what a tough balance they're trying to strike there, certainly. We'll come back to you in just a second. Over the last 35 years, 50 innocent people have been convicted of a crime and sent to prison here in Indiana.
We are all here together to prevent injustice.
Coming up, one of those wrongly convicted Hoosiers supports a bill to change how police use witnesses to identify suspects. Really interesting proposal. We'll dig into that. Also, what's the best way to help the unhoused? A fierce debate this week over a proposal that activists say would criminalize homelessness. But first,
transgender youth are in crisis.
Women deserve the chance to win in their own sports.
the fight over transgender athletes in women's sports comes to the State House and colleges. It's all next here on Crossroads Politics. The debate over trans women in college sports made headlines this week in Washington, D.C. and right here in Indiana. The Department of Education asked the NCAA to remove all records set by trans athletes. And Emily was in the room as lawmakers here debated banning trans women from women's sports in college altogether. Em?
Yeah, Dustin, it was quite a debate. You know, we heard from some folks in the transgender community and their allies about why they believe this bill will harm the transgender community. We also heard from some female athletes who say they competed against and with transgender women both in high school and collegiate sports, and they believe that they were denied a level playing field because of it.
Women deserve the chance to win in their own sports and not just earn a participation trophy.
But Selena Soul, a former high school track and field athlete from Connecticut, told Indiana lawmakers Wednesday, no matter how hard she trained, it was never enough to win against two transgender girls who she often competed against.
I remember what it was like to line up in the blocks, wanting to win, but knew the outcome of the race long before the start.
Soul testified in support of House Bill 1041 that would require Indiana colleges and universities to designate teams as male, female, or co-ed, banning transgender women from playing on a women's team. Supporters of the bill, like its author, say it's about making sure female college athletes have a fair shot when they compete.
It is a common sense legislation that ensures that female athletes are provided with a safe and even playing field at the collegiate level in Indiana.
Republican State Representative Michelle Davis authored a similar bill in 2022 that became law. It bans transgender girls from competing on girls' sports teams in grades K through 12. Davis was there last week when President Trump signed an executive order calling for federal funding to be withheld from any schools that let trans women compete on women's sports teams. A day later, the NCAA announced it was changing its policy on trans women being allowed to participate in women's collegiate sports. The new policy bans them from doing so. So why not let the NCAA policies dictate who can play on what team? That was Democratic State Representative Ed Delaney's question about the bill.
We have a very difficult situation with some people who are struggling with their identity. And I think part of what's going on here is an effort to show that we really don't like them.
Advocates for the transgender community say 1041 puts a target on the backs of transgender folks, sending the message they're not welcome in Indiana.
Transgender youth are in crisis, and not because of who they are, but because of how they are being treated. They need leaders who will protect them, not politicians who make them out to be an enemy.
The Education Committee passed this bill out of committee by a vote to 12 to 1. It now goes to the full House for consideration, but clearly, as you saw there, Dustin, strong feelings, strong opinions on both sides of this issue.
Yeah, it doesn't get any more personal when we talk about our identities. And Emily, this is not the first time this issue of transgender rights has come up this session.
Yeah, not at all. That's right. We heard from parents earlier this session. And last year, Indiana banned gender-affirming care for minors. That included a clause that would prosecute doctors who, quote, aided and abetted out-of-state treatment for trans kids. Parents have argued that that has hurt their children because doctors can't even say if they think the gender-affirming care would be helpful. They've asked lawmakers to remove that clause to get their kids that care. And Representative Chris Campbell introduced House Bill 1444 to do just that. It was sent to the House's Public Health Committee, but it has not got a hearing yet. And we know that the deadline for second and third readings on these bills is next week. So it would appear that this bill is likely dead in the water. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Let's bring in Nikki to help answer that question. Do you agree with that assessment that it could be dead in the water?
Oh, not the actual ban. You mean the second bill? Yeah, I think the transgender ban for college is going to easily pass.
Okay.
But the second one on trying to take the penalty out for the doctors, yeah, that's doesn't appear to be going anywhere.
Governor Holcomb tried to veto Indiana's ban on transgender girls playing in K-12 girls sports. It was overruled by lawmakers. Do you expect similar involvement from Governor Braun on this type of thing, or do you think it would need
Governor Braun has been very clear that he agrees with this move. And I found the most interesting thing about that committee hearing is to see the difference in the Democrats who voted against the high school ban but supported the college ban. It just shows the entire environment around this topic has massively shifted in society in the last 3 years.
All right, Nikki, we'll check back. Thank you. Since 1989, nearly 50 Hoosiers have been put behind bars for a crime they didn't commit. A third of them were convicted because witnesses mistakenly identified them in a photo lineup. Emily, you spoke with one of those innocent men this week who spent time behind bars. He supports a bill that he says would keep this kind of thing from happening.
Yeah, Dustin, Leon Benson spent nearly 25 years behind bars for a murder he did not commit, and he told lawmakers that story this week in a committee hearing, hoping to convince them to move this bill forward.
We are all here together to prevent injustice.
Justice brought Leon Benson to the Indiana State House Tuesday, and the opportunity to tell his story to lawmakers.
I was a victim of misidentification.
Because of that, Leon was wrongly convicted of a murder he didn't commit. Now a free man, he wants to prevent the same thing from happening to others. That's why he spoke in support of Senate Bill 141 that would require police to follow guidelines when doing a suspect lineup with an eyewitness to a crime.
This is something bigger than both sides of the aisle. It's a human thing.
The bill establishes 4 guidelines for police doing lineups. 1, both the eyewitness and the investigator doing the lineup wouldn't know which person in the lineup was the suspect.
In a standard lineup, law enforcement typically know who the suspect is.
Winnie Yee with the Innocence Project says that can sometimes lead to police unintentionally giving clues on who the eyewitness should pick. Police would also not be allowed to use other people in the lineup who look vastly different from the suspect, making the suspect stick out. Police would also be required to let the eyewitness know they won't stop investigating the case just because the eyewitness identifies a suspect. Finally, at the end of a lineup, an eyewitness would have to say how confident they were they had picked out the right suspect.
Had those procedures been in place back in 1998 when I was arrested, I strongly believe that I wouldn't have been wrongfully incarcerated for nearly 25 years.
Time Leon Benson can never get back. He can only move forward, trying to prevent what happened to him from happening to someone else.
It makes me feel a lot better that there will be very few Leon Bensons in the future or people that's wrongfully incarcerated.
Now, another part of this bill requires investigators not to rely solely on facial recognition technology. They would need other evidence to support those findings. This bill is receiving bipartisan support. Republican and Democratic lawmakers wrote it together, so it's not surprising that it passed out of committee with a unanimous vote. Dustin?
And this wasn't the only criminal justice bill this week, was it?
No, several bills moved in the House Courts and Criminal Code Committee. One of those bills is House Bill 1188. This is a Republican-backed bill that increases the penalty for resisting arrest. If you do it with a vehicle or a deadly weapon, it would be a level 5 felony. Right now, it's a level 6 felony. That takes the maximum penalty from 2.5 years to 6 years. If you used a vehicle and someone was seriously hurt or you had done so before, it would be a level 4 felony. Right now, it's a level 5 felony. That takes the maximum penalty from 6 years to 12 years. So significant increases in both cases. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Let's bring in Nikki Kelly again to talk about these bills. Criminal justice, both of those bills, they have bipartisan support, I believe, but they aren't high-profile bills. Do you expect them to make it all the way through?
Yeah, the eyewitness bill is definitely getting some attention, and I think it's very interesting. I think police have generally been supportive of some changes. I think even they recognize that sometimes they are unknowingly kind of pushing a witness toward some person over another. The second bill is definitely not getting very much attention, but they are constantly increasing penalties for things like this. I saw several other bills like that this week. So those usually skate through without a problem.
Well, that first bill, I mean, you talk about powerful testimony. I mean, somebody who is, anytime you hear from somebody who spent time behind bars who is innocent, it's going to get your attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Nikki. Coming up, lawmakers at the State House to represent you, of course, but you aren't the only ones they listen to. We're breaking down the multi-million-dollar lobbying industry here in Indiana, the latest numbers on how much is spent lobbying. But first,
Pressure for these folks to move inside and off the street.
The worst possible response to their circumstances is to arrest them.
should it be illegal to sleep on public property? The fight over dealing with homelessness next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. This week, advocates for the unhoused and underserved gathered at the State House. They were speaking out against a bill critics say would make living on the street or in a homeless encampment a crime. Emily, you were there and heard from both sides on this debate.
Yeah, Dustin, under the bill, if police found someone staying or sleeping on the street or in an encampment area, the first time they would give them a warning and offer to take them to a shelter. If that person, though, did not move within 24 hours, the next time police would come and arrest them and take them to jail. That could lead to the person facing a $500 fine and up to 60 days in jail. House Bill 1662 was authored by Republican State Representative Michelle Davis. Similar bills have been passed into law in other states. Several people testified against HB 1662, saying it criminalizes homelessness.
The worst possible response to their circumstances is to arrest them, saddling them with a criminal record that only deepens their hardship, entangling them in costly court proceedings, fines and fees that put them further behind, and bench warrants that make stability even more elusive.
Every year, 500 Hoosier veterans experience homelessness. Is the General Assembly's response to our homeless veterans really going to be handcuffs instead of help?
If you never experienced being homeless, then I suggest not to come up with these kind of bills that will only attack the homeless. Come up with a solution to put more shelters on the streets.
More must be done to help people leave the streets. This bill creates two things we desperately need: pressure for these folks to move inside and off the street, and a last resort to save lives. The goal of this policy is not for a single person to go to jail, but in extreme circumstances, law enforcement must intervene to save lives. Thank you. I'm happy to answer.
That gentleman that you just heard there talking was the only person who testified in support of this bill. That was Devin Kurtz with the Cicero Institute, a nonpartisan public policy organization that supports this bill, saying that it will get people off the streets, especially in extreme circumstances, extreme weather circumstances, and ultimately save lives. The bill's author, Republican Representative Michelle Davis, sent 13 News a statement about the bill. It read, quote, "I authored House Bill 1662 this session to help keep our communities safe, accessible, and well-maintained for everyone. This measure sets clear guidelines while allowing flexibility and compassion in enforcement. This is just a start, and we need to continue to look for long-term solutions to help reduce homelessness." Now, this bill did not receive a vote in committee. The chairman of the committee said that he was going to hold it, but the bill has until next Monday to get out of committee if it has a chance of moving forward in the legislative process and getting over to the Senate for lawmakers there to consider it as well. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thanks. Nikki, your team at the Capitol Chronicle has been following this particular bill. Was this modeled from another bill in other states, or other states doing this?
There are definitely a number of red states who are moving similar bills. And I think it came after a Supreme Court of the United States ruling last year that allowed cities, towns, states to step in a little more forcefully that had been fought. And so now that they've gotten that language that they can move forward, we're seeing these bills. It is scheduled for a vote on Monday in committee, so I think it'll probably pass. I think it would have a better shot, though, if it was also coupled with, you know, the carrot and the stick kind of thing, right? You know, we want them off the streets, but it actually doesn't provide any funding for mental health treatment or...
Right, and I was going to ask you about that. Are there other bills that are being considered that deal with mental health, housing, shelter, that kind of thing?
There are certainly housing bills, but not for housing shelter, like homeless shelters. So that could be put in here. And there are certainly bills moving on mental health funding, and they've set up a great program in Indiana to expand mental health treatment. So I need to give them credit there. But I just think if this was combined with some sort of effort to increase access to shelters, that
might have more support.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the unhoused issue, it is a complicated one with people in desperate need of shelter and communities looking for stability and safety. Our Lauren Kostick looked into this as well this week. She went into the Garfield Park neighborhood in Indianapolis, where neighbors say somebody has to do something more for people experiencing homelessness and their neighbors.
In the Garfield Park neighborhood, frustration and concern.
Seeing things like public urination, defecation, bathing, and that's where things started getting really scary.
Catherine Kataka and several other neighbors are begging for help after an uptick in lawless behavior they believe is connected to the unhoused population in the area. Multiple fires, unkept camps, and suspected drug use.
I had to call emergency and non-emergency services for overdoses.
Brandishing of weapons. I've called IMPD and nothing was done.
One of the hotspots is Shelby and Raymond. Just last month, IFD was called to a vacant building fire believed to be caused by squatters. The second fire on that block within the last year. The other hotspot is the park itself along Pleasant Run Trail. Encampments and trash lining the pathway. And neighbors have shared their concerns with the city, calling 911 and the non-emergency line.
And not seeing any traction is really troubling.
Which is why the Neighborhood Association is now getting involved.
Right, we have compassion for that, but it's very frustrating, and we're trying to find that balance because we really feel like we're caught in between.
Rich Whitney says they're not the experts in fixing this problem, pleading with the city to prioritize his neighborhood.
The frustration really is with the people doing the drugs, the antisocial behavior, and just not making it pleasant for anybody to live around.
So 13 News sat down with Andrew Merkley. He oversees homelessness and eviction prevention for the city.
There's no one answer. We're not going to be able to arrest our way out of homelessness in the city of Indianapolis.
He said leaders are aware of the problem and are working on a new homeless shelter. They also started meeting weekly to discuss more immediate solutions, like offering help to those living in camps. The only problem is the city can't force people to accept that help. That's where two ordinances come in. The first prohibits sleeping overnight on park property. The second allows the city to close camps that are a public health and safety concern.
Right now, we don't feel like it's necessary to close the camps in Garfield Park.
I won't say that. We are working on solutions to get those camps cleaned up with our contractors and to work with the neighbors who are living in those camps so that they can help maintain their camps a little bit better.
IMPD's homeless unit is also involved in a statement saying, while our primary goal is to connect individuals to resources and assistance, IMPD will take law enforcement action when crimes are committed. In the meantime, leaving neighbors caught in the middle,
We really need the mayor and the city to step up on this.
desperate for a solution to this complex problem. In Indianapolis, Lauren Kostick, 13 News.
As lawmakers consider how they're going to vote, they aren't only listening to you, they're also listening to the lobbyists, the folks who try and influence their vote. And lobbying groups spent a lot of money to do that last year, nearly $30 million. They reportedly spent nearly $32 million the year before that. This is in Indiana. This is all from our partners at the Capitol Chronicle as well. The healthcare and energy industries figured prominently here. The Indiana State Medical Association topped employer lobbyist spending, followed by IU Health, which is the state's largest healthcare system. Also near the top of that list, Eli Lilly and Company, along with the Indiana Hospital Association and the Indiana Healthcare Association. Now, among the big spending energy lobbyists was Duke Energy Indiana, the Indiana Energy Association, and the Clean Grid Alliance. Two tobacco companies, RAI Services and Philip Morris USA, plus gambling companies Caesars Entertainment also made that top list of lobbyists. Aaron Dussault is an associate professor of political science at IU Indianapolis and joins me now to talk about this. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
So, what are these lobbyists spending this money on in generally? I mean, are they buying tickets? Are they whining and dining? How's that work?
I mean, some of that, but a lot of the expense actually goes into paying salaries. So if you're going to set up a permanent lobbying shop in Indianapolis, you need to pay employees, you need to pay lobbyists, you need to find a location, and so you're going to have a lot of expenses that are just in the logistics of being able to lobby.
And there are so many lobbyists out there. It seems like we've seen really over the decades a growing number of them to represent more industries.
Right, yeah, this is happening in Indiana and nationally. You know, at congressional level, just to put it in context, there's over $4 billion spent to lobby Congress.
And so how do we make sure that there are safeguards in place? Because there's a fine line you got to walk when you're a lobbyist, right? We're not, quote unquote, buying votes. You can't literally do that. But at the same time, you are paid to convince somebody to vote a certain way. So what kind of transparency is there?
Well, I mean, you have to register. So the first thing you have to do, if you're going to spend $500 or more, or you're going to receive $500 or more as an individual to lobby the state legislature, you have to register as a lobbyist. Also, if you're a company and you're an employer of a lobbyist, the same kind of threshold, you have to register. So the first thing you have to do is register with the state. The second thing is you're going to have to have annual reports that you're going to have to make. You know, and so this is where you're going to put a lot of the details of what you're spending your money on. And secondly, if you're going to give any type of a gift to a legislator, you have to report that. If it's over a certain number, I think it's like $50, so not very high.
Okay.
So that includes things like if you invite them to a reception, you're supposed to keep track of that. How much, how many people showed up, and that would be considered lobbyable individuals.
And that's all open to the public to check out. I can see that if I want to.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Aaron Dussault from IU Indianapolis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. You can watch us every Sunday of the legislative session at 10 a.m. here on WTHR Plus or on demand. For Emily Longnecker and Nikki Kelly, I'm Dustin Grove. Thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you next time.